Smith and all of us here at NFL Now for spending your most important commodity, time, right here with us. Over the next 2 hours, we will find our way across the NFL nation and deliver immediate information on your favorite institution. But we start with what's new right now. And thanks to his dedication in distributing news via social media, we know the Saints are bringing Antonio Brown in for a look-see because he posted a picture of the workout waiver he was asked to sign. Always a great idea. But has since deleted it. So for more on the man who has more receiving touchdowns, even though he did not play this season, than any other player in the league since 2013, we bring in Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero. Ian, Tom, what do we know? What is the latest on Antonio Brown trying to get back in?
Well, you do have to love a situation where a team wants absolute discretion on their free agent wide receiver workouts, just doing their due diligence before the final game of the season. And you wake up and Antonio Brown is literally posting his waiver for social media for all to see. Yes, the Saints are working on Antonio Brown among other receivers today, and it really does seem like they are making sure what kind of shape he is in, doing some due diligence. And sound at this point like there's anything real urgent here, but in the event they do have an injury, they want to know what is going to happen with AB, and if they do end up signing him, what kind of shape he's in. Now, the other part of this, Tom, as you know, is the league issue. The investigation into Antonio Brown continues, and as the league publicly stated in September, they remain able to place him on the commissioner's exempt list in the event that someone actually signs him. So it's hard to imagine he plays this year unless the investigation gets completed and he's completely exonerated.
And Ian, the personal conduct policy does provide for players to appeal their placement on the commissioner's exempt list via writing within 3 days. That would then send us into an entire appeals process. He would, in essence, be on leave with pay. It's a lot for teams to take in and decide whether or not they're actually going to get some productivity with Antonio Brown versus just negative headlines and negative press while waiting for that investigation to conclude. Now, in terms of the football aspect of this, we have not seen Antonio Brown on the field since September 15th. But that has not scared off the Saints before. You remember last November, they signed Dez Bryant, who was coming off of an injury, had needed time to get himself back. They signed him, and in his first practice, he ends up tearing his Achilles. With Antonio Brown, again, you're not talking about that long of a layoff, but there are some questions here. That's why it makes sense, even if it's just for updating an emergency list, to bring him in along with some other receivers, including former Redskins wide receiver Maurice Harris, see what exactly he looks like if you get to a place where somewhere down the line in the playoffs, you might need him.
So from one way of using social media, whether or not it works for Antonio Brown or not, we'll see, to another, the Atlanta Falcons using their social media feed to share that they, in fact, are going to retain the services of general manager Thomas Dimitroff and head coach Dan Quinn for the 2020 season. Something Ian, you and Tom have reported these players have been playing for Dan Quinn to try to keep his job. Here is owner Arthur Blank on that decision.
We clearly have the players. We clearly have the roster. It doesn't mean it can't be better. It will be better in free agency this year. It'll be better in draft this year. But it's very clear with a 5-2 record, not just 5-2, but winning 3 of those games away. I think that Dan has corrected the things that need to be corrected, has fixed the things that need to be fixed. There's always going to be something, if you will. But I think we're in a really good place with him now.
All right, so Tom, Ian, what led to this decision?
Well, in part, it's basically how the players have played. And like the Falcons, they've been on the hot seat. Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff, the general manager, have been on the hot seat the whole season. And they coming out of the bye, Arthur Blank said he wanted to consider things, wanted to see how the team did right out of the bye. Ended up having a really good performance there. But they made a couple small changes, including installing Raheem Morris in charge of the defense. That changed everything. And Quinn being able and willing to change, these players playing for him like crazy, winners of 3 straight, did enough to convince owner Arthur Blank that they should stay the course for 1 more year. But of course, Tom, there's been a small structural change. They both are now reporting to Rich McKay, and he reports to Arthur Blank.
And Arthur Blank has spoken publicly before about the value he thinks with having several former general managers on staff. Rich McKay is one of those. Rich was instrumental in helping the process of getting the new stadium built in Atlanta. Now, obviously, that stadium has been built, and so he's taking on a broader role within the organization. The Raheem Morris piece of this is really interesting because this is a guy with a defensive background, of course, had a 3-season stint as the head coach with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, potentially a name that you're going to hear getting interview requests in the offseason, but they had moved him to offense in recent years. He was coaching the wide receivers. You get to midseason, they decided that they needed to make changes. They move Raheem to defense, and that certainly seems like that's one of the factors where they've gotten better on that side of the ball. Remember, Dan Quinn has gone through several changes. He's a guy with a defensive background. He fired Richard Smith after the Super Bowl appearance. He fired another coordinator, Marquand Manuel, after last season, and then basically got halfway through this year and fired himself as defensive coordinator, turned over the play calling to others. If Raheem Morris does stay and does not get a head coaching job elsewhere, that is a key piece of what they're going to be in 2020.
All right, so a pair of stories to some degree that are affected off the field. What about one on the field? Zach Ertz has got 35, I believe 33 more receptions than the next leading Eagle. We know how important a piece he is to that Eagles offense. What is his status for this must-win game on Sunday?
Well, the good news is Zach Ertz was on the field for practice today. The bad news is it did not sound like he did very much, and he's dealing with a rib injury, also listed on the report as a back injury, and Coach Doug Peterson basically said he wasn't sure how much he'd actually be able to do, and this is about keeping him out of harm's way. He wants to play very badly. He's pushing to play, but is it safe enough? That's something they don't know yet.
A good piece of injury news for that Eagles offense, Ian. Jordan Howard, their running back, cleared for contact yesterday, and Doug Peterson says he will be good to go in that big Week 17 game against the Giants. Howard has missed the last 6 games in a row because of his shoulder injury. He just seemed to be hitting his stride, too, right before he went down. Peterson suggested that we're going to see a mix here. Miles Sanders, of course, has been productive for them. Boston Scott has gotten the ball recently. Howard, though, brings a different physical type of an element to that offense. That's something they feel they've been missing.
All right. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Tom. You mentioned Jordan Howard, 6 touchdowns from scrimmage in those 6 weeks prior to that injury. So certainly a welcome addition should he be able to get out there. As news breaks, we'll bring the both of you back throughout the hour and whatever 50 minutes we have left. Meanwhile, Week 14, the Giants jumped the Birds for a 17-0 lead, only to watch Carson Wentz rally his Eagles, throwing for over 300 yards, including a touchdown pass to the aforementioned Zach Ertz in overtime that started this dance to a division crown.
We have to win this one. It's just like the last few weeks. I think everyone knows that. Obviously we've had a couple emotional wins the last few weeks, and as leaders and coaches as well have done a great job of just making sure guys are still bought into this, in the here and now, and not dwelling on the past, not looking ahead either, and just going out to work. We got our work cut out for us against a good opponent on the road, and obviously if we win, we're in. So we know what's at stake.
All right, so we got the injury updates. We've heard from Carson. Let's head to East Rutherford and our Kim Jones. Kim, how is Carson doing it with all of these injuries that he has had to deal with on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Matt, as I stand here at the Giants facility. The Giants, of course, know their season ends on Sunday. It's the Eagles that can clinch the division here at MetLife Stadium with a win over the New York Giants. And I was in Philadelphia yesterday in that locker room, and we just heard from Carson Wentz, but yesterday I talked to backup Josh McCown, who has seen everything in this league. I thought he made a couple of really good points. He said, in this situation with the Eagles as decimated by injury as they are at receiver, the veteran receivers are out, young, inexperienced receivers are in, and McCown told me that he has seen that bring out a lot of good things in Carson in terms of his leadership. He believes that Carson has embraced the idea that he can help these young receivers grow, he can spread the ball around, and perhaps most significantly, Josh McCown told me, he's a leader of guys who really need to be led. And over these last 3 weeks, it's certainly working. 3 wins, 6 touchdown passes by Carson Wentz, and no interceptions.
And speaking of leading young guys, Miles Sanders, the rookie, he is a young Eagle having a major impact. What have they said has been so impressive about him in his first season?
They love his work ethic. They love the fact that he didn't have a fast start, but he is certainly finishing this season very well. They love the idea that he's only 40 scrimmage yards behind the rookie leader. That, of course, is Josh Jacobs out in Oakland. So Miles Sanders, perhaps quietly, has put together a Rookie of the Year kind of season. I know the Eagles believe that he should be and is a legitimate candidate for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he has put himself in that position with his numbers. And I absolutely loved this conversation I had yesterday in Philadelphia. My good friend Reuben Frank works for NBC Philadelphia, and because I'm also a Penn Stater, like Miles, like Saquon, Reuben said, I know you're going to love this story. He wrote this week about Miles Sanders under the running backs coach Deuce Staley. They were both second-round picks of the Eagles, 22 years apart. And Miles told Reuben about Deuce. I've never had that father figure in my life. It has meant a lot to Deuce to have someone who not only cares about him, but is coaching him up, pushing him, believing in him, and truly believes that Miles can be a great player in this league. It's a wonderful story, NBC Philadelphia. And really this time of year, the kind of story that helps us realize this is about X's and O's, but it's not just about X's and O's.
Yeah, you mentioned it, Penn State, and of course your affiliation. We can't step to that, Kim, but a chance for Sanders to maybe climb out of that shadow of Saquon's, having done some great work for the Nittany Lions while he was there as well on Sunday, get the Eagles that big victory. Thank you, Kim. And as we talk about that game, the Eagles versus the Giants, remember the Cowboys taking on the Redskins, and that division is still up for grabs. It is simple for the Eagles. Win, and they are in. Now, if they lose, they still have a chance at 8-8 to win the NFC East crown should the Dallas Cowboys slip up against the Redskins.
Wentz looks, Wentz fires, touchdown! Dallas got it!
Prescott rushed up the middle, is hauled down.
Goes to Sanders, he's in, touchdown!
Fourth down, this is almost the ball game. Throwing it deep down the left side into the end zone.
As they beat the Dallas Cowboys 17-9.
You give yourself a chance to be real disappointed. We are.
You never know how the season's going to go.
A disappointing setback for that locker room and for all of us, and I know it is for the fans.
Well, in the Week 2 Cowboys-Redskins clash, Dak dominated, completed 87% of his passes, threw for 3 scores, rushed for 70 yards, and the Cowboys won by double digits to make the playoffs. They'll need to do it again and get some help from another NFC East rival.
It's been getting better, so that's the positive. But just all the treatment, all the different things that they got that the medical staff have in there for me to do. But for the most part, contrasting the heat nice and just doing everything I can to make sure that come Sunday it's better.
So let's lean on our Jane Slater for all the scuttlebutt in the Lone Star State. There was Dak talking about his injury situation. Jane, what do you have as far as the latest and the rest of the team when it comes to injuries?
Well, not much has changed on the injury front as it pertains to Dak Prescott. Of course, he injured that shoulder against the Rams 2 weeks ago. And, you know, he was able to play against the Eagles, although he will tell you that he didn't get all the throws that he might have liked in that one. But he hasn't thrown it all this week. In fact, he had hoped to throw today. That's what he told us in the locker room on Thursday. But during the open portion to the media, that wasn't the case. Here's another injury to keep an eye on. Tyron Smith, his blindside blocker, the left tackle, also didn't practice for 3 days. So we're keeping an eye on it. We have no reason to believe that he won't play. Keep in mind, they've always sort of managed his pain level and some of the injuries that have popped up in the last couple of years. But yeah, both of these guys not doing much in practice. And I did think it was interesting. You heard Dak Prescott talk about how he was managing the pain. He said that alternating heat and cold therapy. He was also asked if he dealt with any injections ahead of the game, pain dealing injections. And he told us, quote, "I did what was necessary."
Yeah, and when you come to injuries, those are people that aren't on the field, but the players that are on the field have had a bit of the drops when it comes to passes this season. Have they mentioned anything about what they think might have led to this issue?
Well, they probably didn't want to talk about it, but I did, Matt. They lead the league with 39 drops this season, but if you also look at some of the gaudy throwing numbers that Dak Prescott has had that year, even he smartly said, you know, when you throw the ball that much, there are going to be situations where that happens. But still, Michael Gallup, who is one of the guys that really internalizes when he doesn't have one of his better games. We have certainly see him step up his game this year. He is actually leading the league in drops, 11 of those, and they do seem to sort of come in clusters. Of course, he even told me yesterday that he was so embarrassed by the fact that he felt like he cost this team that win against the Eagles. He said, in fact, he even went around to a bunch of his teammates and apologized to them, and they said to him, this wasn't your fault. It didn't come down to you at the end of the game. We put ourselves in that situation. But, this group does have such a great chemistry with one another. They worked on that chemistry off the field last season. But while I appreciate the fact that Dak and Michael Gallup have taken ownership for this, they're going to need everybody on the same page if they want this win against the Redskins on Sunday, if they even want a shot at the postseason.
Yeah, and you see that, Jane, for all you journalism students watching. It's not about what they want to talk about. Do what Jane does. It's what you want to talk about, Jane. And that's where you get the good content. Thank you. We appreciate it. From Dallas, you get a look at the NFC standings. Here they are, going into our final week of the season. There are 2 spots that are locked. The winner of the NFC East will be the 4 seed, and the Minnesota Vikings are your final team in.